Victoria Dawson's hands bled into the train compartment's rough wooden seat as she clutched the advertisement that promised her a new life, and she wondered if Cain Lockhart would take one look at her calloused fingers and send her right back to Boston on the next departure. The year was 1882, and the Arizona Territory stretched endlessly outside her window, all red rock and sparse vegetation under a punishing sun that made her heavy traveling dress feel like torture. She had left Massachusetts 3 days ago with nothing but a small trunk, her mother's silver locket, and the kind of desperation that made a 22-year-old woman travel halfway across the country to marry a stranger. The other passengers kept their distance, which suited her fine. 2 older women whispered behind gloved hands, probably speculating about her status as a mail-order bride. The shame should have burned, but Victoria had worn through her capacity for embarrassment somewhere around Kansas. Her palms ached as she shifted the paper between them, reading Cain's words for the 100th time. He needed a wife who could work hard, bear the isolation of ranch life, and understand that affection was something earned through shared labor rather than poetry. He had been honest, at least. Most of the advertisements she had read promised comfort and security, while delivering nothing but broken dreams. Victoria's own hands told a story that contradicted everything a proper lady should be. For 5 years, she had worked in a textile mill after her father's printing business collapsed under debt. Her mother had died 2 years into that fresh hell, lungs destroyed by consumption that the cramped tenement had only accelerated. The machines had been merciless, and the overseers more so. Her fingers had split and bled and calloused over until they resembled a dockworker's more than a woman's. She had tried finding other employment, but no respectable household wanted a maid with hands that rough, and no shop would hire a girl who looked like she belonged in the slums. When the mill caught fire 6 months ago, Victoria had been one of 30 women who barely escaped with their lives. 7 others had not been so fortunate. The owners had locked the exit doors, terrified of theft, and only the intervention of a passing police officer had saved them. The city had expressed sympathy. The newspapers had written concerned articles for 3 days, and then everyone had moved on while the survivors scrambled for any work that would keep them fed. That was when Victoria had seen the advertisement, tucked into a week-old newspaper someone had left at the boarding house. The train lurched, and her stomach rolled with it. She had not eaten since yesterday, rationing the small amount of money she had left. The journey had cost more than expected, and she needed to arrive with at least something in her pocket. Pride was another luxury she had abandoned somewhere in the past, but she drew the line at arriving completely destitute. Snowflake appeared like a mirage through the dust. The town sprawled across the high country of northern Arizona, established by Mormon settlers just a few years prior in 1878. The name came from the 2 founders, Snow and Flake, a piece of trivia she had learned from another passenger. Ponderosa pines dotted the landscape here, a welcome change from the desert they had crossed. The elevation meant cooler temperatures, though the July sun still beat down with authority. Victoria gathered her trunk as the train wheezed to a stop at the small station. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat asking the same question. What if he took one look at her and changed his mind? The correspondence had included no photographs. She knew Cain was 30 years old, owned a cattle ranch 10 miles outside town, and had been widowed 2 years ago. His late wife had died in childbirth along with their infant son, a tragedy he mentioned only in the most clinical terms. He did not want sympathy. The letter had made that clear. He wanted a partner who understood that life in the territory was hard and required a certain toughness. She stepped onto the platform, and the dry heat hit her like a physical force. Boston had been sweltering when she left, humid and thick, but this was different. This heat was clean and sharp, burning away pretense. She scanned the handful of people waiting by the station, trying to guess which might be Cain. He found her first. A man detached himself from the shadow of the station building and walked toward her with the bow-legged gait of someone who spent more time on horseback than on foot. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that tested the seams of his work shirt. His face was weathered by sun and wind, all hard angles and watchful eyes the color of creek water. A battered hat shadowed his features, but she caught the sharp assessment in his gaze as he stopped a respectful distance away. "Miss Dawson." His voice was a low rumble, roughened by dust and disuse. "Mr. Lockhart." She tried to sound confident rather than terrified. Her hands clutched her small handbag so tightly the rough skin caught on the fabric. He nodded once, then reached for her trunk without ceremony. She noticed his hands then, as large and work-worn as her own, scarred and calloused from rope and leather and the thousand small violences of ranch work. He loaded the trunk into a wagon with practiced efficiency, then offered his hand to help her up to the seat. Victoria hesitated for just a second before placing her palm against his. The contact sent a jolt through her that she tried to ignore. His hand was warm and rough and completely engulfed hers. She expected him to recoil at the feel of her calloused skin, but his expression did not change as he steadied her climb into the wagon. The ride out of town was silent. Cain handled the reins with easy competence while Victoria tried not to stare at him. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through the brown hair at his temples. His profile was stern, almost harsh, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. She wondered what he thought of her if she disappointed him. Her traveling dress was clean but obviously mended, her face was unremarkable, and her figure was too thin from years of poor food and hard labor. "The ranch is about an hour out," he said finally, breaking the silence. "We run about 200 head of cattle, some horses. I have 2 hands who help with the work, but they bunk in town most nights. You would be alone with me most of the time. If that troubles you, speak now." Victoria swallowed hard. "It does not trouble me. Good." He was quiet for another mile, then added, "I am not a cruel man, Miss Dawson, but I am not an easy one either. I work hard, and I expect the same from anyone who shares my home. The territory is not forgiving, and neither is ranch life. If you are looking for comfort and leisure, you have made a mistake. I am not looking for leisure, Mr. Lockhart. I am looking for a life that does not involve 14-hour days in a factory where the owners bar the doors from the outside." That got his attention. His head turned slightly and she felt the weight of his gaze. "That where your hands come from, factory work," heat flooded her face. She had hoped he would not notice or at least not mention it. "Yes, a textile mill in Boston. I worked there for 5 years until it burned down. I understand if that changes your mind about the arrangement. I can return to town, perhaps find work there." "Why would it change my mind?" She blinked at him, confused. "My hands, they are not exactly ladylike." Cain made a sound that might have been a laugh, though it held no humor. "Miss Dawson, the last thing I need is a lady. I need someone who understands work. Someone who will not fall apart at the sight of blood or cry when things get difficult. Your letters suggested you were that person. Were you lying?" "No," she said firmly. "I was not lying." "Then your hands do not matter. Fact is, they might be an asset. A woman who knows about hard work is worth 10 who only know about tea parties and calling cards." They lapsed into silence again, but something had shifted. Victoria felt the knot in her chest loosen slightly. She watched the landscape roll past, taking in the scattered pines and the distant mountains. It was beautiful in a stark, uncompromising way, so different from the crowded streets of Boston, the constant press of humanity, the smoke and noise and desperation. The ranch appeared gradually, sprawling across a valley between low hills. A house, barn, several outbuildings and corrals spread out in organized chaos. The house was larger than she expected, built from rough-hewn logs with a covered porch that wrapped around two sides. It was not fancy, but it looked solid and well-maintained. Chickens scratched in a fenced yard, and several horses lifted their heads from grazing as the wagon approached. Cain pulled up in front of the house and set the brake. Before she could move, he had climbed down and come around to her side, offering his hand again. She accepted it, trying not to think about how small her rough palm felt in his larger one. "I will show you inside," he said, releasing her hand to grab her trunk. "We can discuss arrangements once you have had time to settle." The interior of the house was dim after the bright sunlight, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust. The main room was large, dominated by a stone fireplace and furnished with sturdy, practical furniture. Everything was clean but obviously managed by someone who cared more about function than decoration. A kitchen area occupied one end, separated by a long work table. She could see two doors leading off the main room, presumably to bedrooms. Cain set her trunk down near one of the doors. "This would be your room." It was. "It was where my wife stayed before." He cleared his throat. "I sleep in the other room. I am assuming you would prefer separate arrangements until the wedding. When would that be?" "There is a circuit preacher due in Snowflake in 3 days. I thought that would give you time to decide if you wanted to go through with it. If you change your mind, I will pay for your journey back to Boston." No questions asked. Victoria looked at him, this stern-faced stranger who was offering her an escape even as he offered her a future. It was more consideration than anyone had shown her in years. "I will not change my mind, Mr. Lockhart, but I appreciate the option." Something flickered in his expression, too quick to identify. "Call me Cain. If we are going to be married, we should at least use our given names." "Then you should call me Victoria," he nodded slowly, as if committing that to memory. "Victoria, all right. Are you hungry? I have stew from yesterday that just needs warming." Her stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, answering for her. The corner of Cain's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I will take that as a yes. Get yourself settled. The pump for water is out back. There is a basin in your room for washing. Take your time." He moved toward the kitchen area while Victoria carried her trunk into the bedroom. It was simply furnished with a bed, dresser, and washstand, but the mattress looked infinitely more comfortable than anything she had slept on in years. A window overlooked the yard, framed by plain curtains. She set down her trunk and sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. The last 3 days of travel crashed over her, along with the weight of what she had done. She was in Arizona territory, about to marry a man she had met an hour ago, gambling everything on a future that existed only in correspondence and hope. Her hands trembled as she unpacked her few belongings. 2 spare dresses, undergarments, her mother's locket, a battered copy of poetry that had somehow survived the years. She placed the locket on the dresser, running her rough fingers over the engraved surface. Her mother would have been appalled at this whole situation. She had wanted better for her daughter, education and refinement and a good match. Instead, Victoria had ended up in a factory and now here, preparing to marry a rancher in the Arizona wilderness. But her mother had also been practical. When things got difficult, she had done what needed doing without complaint. She had taken in washing when her husband's business failed, had spent her last days worrying more about Victoria's future than her own suffering. She would have understood this choice, even if she mourned the necessity of it. Victoria washed her face and hands in the basin, changed into her other dress, and ventured back into the main room. Cain had set 2 bowls on the table, steam rising from rich-smelling stew. He gestured to one of the chairs and she sat, suddenly aware of how hungry she actually was. The stew was simple but good, heavy on meat and potatoes. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Cain spoke. "Tell me about Boston, about your life there." So she did. She told him about her father's printing business, how he had been honest but not shrewd, too willing to extend credit to customers who never paid. About the debt that swallowed everything, her mother's illness, the grim years in the mill. She did not spare the details, wanting him to understand exactly what kind of woman he was agreeing to marry. If he was going to change his mind, better it happen now. Cain listened without interrupting, his creek-water eyes steady on her face. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My father came west with nothing but a horse and a saddle, built this ranch from scratch, fighting drought and hard winters and cattle thieves. He married my mother when she was 16, fresh off a wagon train. She died when I was 12, during a particularly bad winter. Fever took her." He paused, pushing stew around his bowl. "My father passed 5 years ago, left me the ranch and 1,000 lectures about hard work being the only thing that matters. And your wife," his jaw tightened, "Sarah. We married when I was 25, her 20. She was the daughter of a shopkeeper in Snowflake. Sweet girl, but not built for this life. She tried, I will give her that, but the isolation wore on her. She got pregnant and the nearest doctor was in town an hour away. When her time came, it went wrong fast. I rode for help, but by the time I got back with the doctor—" He stopped, his knuckles white around his spoon. "She was gone, the baby too, a son." Victoria's throat tightened. "I am sorry. It was 2 years ago. I have learned to live with it." He met her eyes. "I am telling you this so you understand what you are agreeing to. Life here is isolated. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. Town is an hour by wagon. If something goes wrong, help might not arrive in time. You need to be strong, Victoria, not just in body but in spirit." "I understand." "Do you?" He leaned forward slightly. "Because there is a difference between understanding words and living the reality. I have had enough of death. If you are not sure you can handle this, tell me now." Victoria set down her spoon and placed her hands flat on the table, palms up. The calluses were thick, the skin cracked and scarred from years of brutal work. These hands survived 5 years in a textile mill where women died because the owners cared more about profit than lives. They pulled me out of a burning building. They kept me alive through winters in tenements where the cold was so brutal we burned furniture to stay warm. I am not delicate, Cain. I am not fragile. I have had my share of death and hardship, and I am still here. So yes, I understand. I understand better than you think." Something changed in his expression. The hard lines softened slightly, and he reached across the table, his rough hand covering hers. The touch was gentle, surprising for such a large man. "Then I think we will do all right together." The 3 days before the wedding passed in a blur of activity. Cain showed her around the ranch, introducing her to the daily routines. She met his 2 ranch hands, Jack and Tommy, who were polite but clearly uncertain about the new arrangement. Jack was older, pushing 50, with a weathered face and kind eyes. Tommy was barely 20, enthusiastic but still learning. Both of them worked hard, and she could see they respected Cain even if they did not completely understand him. Victoria threw herself into learning everything she could. She helped with the chickens, learned to pump water from the well, figured out the massive cast iron stove in the kitchen. Cain watched her with those assessing eyes, occasionally offering guidance but mostly letting her figure things out. She appreciated that. He did not hover or condescend, just gave her the space to prove herself. On the second evening, they sat on the porch as the sun set in a spectacular display of orange and purple. The air had cooled to something almost comfortable, and the smell of pine drifted on the breeze. Cain whittled a piece of wood while Victoria mended one of his shirts, companionable silence stretching between them. "You are good with your hands," he said suddenly. "The mending, I mean, and the cooking this morning was the best breakfast I have had in months." She glanced up from her work. "I had practice. My mother taught me to sew before she got sick, and cooking in the boarding house was everyone's responsibility. You learned fast or you went hungry." He nodded, shaving another curl of wood from the piece he was working on. "I am not much for conversation," he admitted. "My father was not a talkative man, and I guess I take after him. If that bothers you, I can try to do better." "It does not bother me. I spent years surrounded by the noise of machines. Silence is a gift. Still, a marriage should have some talking in it. Sarah used to complain that I was too quiet, said she felt like she was living with a ghost sometimes." Victoria set down the mending and looked at him directly. "Cain, I am not Sarah. I do not know what she needed from you, but I am not her. I will not expect you to be someone you are not." He met her gaze, something vulnerable flickering in those hard eyes. "And I will not expect you to be anything but yourself. Rough hands and all." The phrase caught her off guard. Before she could stop herself, she looked down at her palms, at the calluses and scars she had been self-conscious about her entire adult life. "They are ugly," she said quietly. "I know that." Cain set down his whittling and reached for her hand. She let him take it, holding her breath as he turned it over, examining the roughened palm, the cracked skin, the fingers that would never be soft again. Then, to her complete shock, he lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. Not the back of her hand in some courtly gesture, but her palm, right on the worst of the calluses. "They are beautiful," he said, his voice rough. "They are the hands of a survivor, of someone who does what needs doing without complaint. That is the most beautiful thing I can think of." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes, emotion welling up so fast she could barely contain it. No one had ever said anything like that to her. No one had ever looked at the evidence of her hard life and called it beautiful. She blinked hard, trying to keep the tears from falling, but a few escaped anyway. Cain's thumb brushed gently across her knuckles. "Did I say something wrong?" "No," she managed, her voice thick. "You said something very right." They sat there as the sun finished setting, her hand in his, and Victoria felt something shift in her chest. This was not love, not yet. But it was the beginning of something, a foundation being laid stone by stone. Respect, understanding, the recognition of shared strength. The wedding took place in Snowflake's small church on a bright Saturday morning. Victoria wore her best dress, which was still worn and plain, but Cain looked at her like she was wearing silk and lace. The circuit preacher was an older man with kind eyes who kept the ceremony short and simple. Jack and Tommy served as witnesses, both of them dressed in their cleanest shirts. A few townspeople attended out of curiosity, wanting to see the mail-order bride who had traveled all the way from Boston. When Cain slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, his hands were steady even though hers shook. When the preacher pronounced them married and told Cain he could kiss his bride, he leaned down with surprising gentleness and pressed his lips to hers. It was chaste, brief, but it sent warmth flooding through her entire body. They held a small meal afterward at the town's only restaurant. Jack regaled them with stories about Cain's early days on the ranch, clearly enjoying the chance to embarrass his boss. Tommy added his own tales, and even Cain smiled at some of the memories. Victoria relaxed as the meal progressed, the knot of anxiety in her chest loosening. These people were becoming her people. This strange new place was becoming home. The ride back to the ranch as the sun lowered toward the horizon felt different. She was no longer Victoria Dawson, mail-order bride. She was Victoria Lockhart, a rancher's wife, heading to her home. The distinction mattered more than she expected. Cain was quiet on the drive, but his hand occasionally brushed against hers on the wagon seat. Accidental touches that sent little thrills through her. When they arrived at the ranch, he helped her down from the wagon with the same careful gentleness he had shown at the church. Inside, the house was dim and cool. Victoria moved to light lamps while Cain stabled the horses. Her hands were steady as she prepared coffee, the domestic routine already becoming familiar. When he came back inside, she handed him a cup, and he took it with a nod of thanks. They sat at the table, and the weight of what came next hung between them. Cain cleared his throat. "Victoria, I want you to know that I will not force myself on you. We are married legally, but that does not mean I expect you to. That is, I will not insist on my rights as a husband until you are ready." She looked at this man, this stranger who had kissed her scarred palms and called them beautiful, who had given her an escape even as he offered her a future. "Cain, I appreciate that, but I am not afraid of you. Still, there is no rush. We can take our time getting to know each other properly." Victoria reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "I would like that." They finished their coffee in comfortable silence, then Cain showed her how to bank the fire in the stove for the night. He walked her to her bedroom door and hesitated there, clearly wanting to say something. Finally, he just squeezed her hand gently and said, "Good night, Victoria. Welcome home." She closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. Through the wall, she could hear him moving around his room, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of clothing. She changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed, exhausted but too keyed up to sleep immediately. The events of the day replayed in her mind. The simple ceremony, Cain's gentle kiss, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. This was not the life she had imagined as a girl. But lying there in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night, she thought it might be something better than imagination. It might be real. The next weeks fell into a rhythm. Victoria rose before dawn to start breakfast while Cain handled the early morning ranch work. They ate together, discussing the day's tasks, then went about their separate responsibilities. She tended the chickens, worked the garden, managed the house, cooked and mended. It was hard work, but different from the mill. Here, she could see the results of her labor. The garden she tended produced food they ate. The clothes she mended kept them comfortable. Everything had purpose and meaning. Cain was patient as she learned, offering guidance without criticism. When she accidentally let the chickens escape their pen, he helped her round them up without a single complaint. When her first attempt at bread came out dense enough to use as a doorstop, he ate it anyway and said it just needed practice. His steady presence became the anchor of her days. They talked more as time passed. Not constant conversation, but meaningful exchanges. Cain told her about his father's vision for the ranch, about the challenges of running cattle in territory that could be harsh and unforgiving. She told him about her dreams before the mill, about wanting to be a teacher, about the books she had loved as a child. He listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was actually paying attention. The ranch hands warmed to her as well. Jack started calling her Madam with real respect, and Tommy often lingered after meals to hear her stories about Boston. She enjoyed their company, these rough men who worked hard and laughed easily. They softened some of Cain's harder edges, teasing him in ways that made him almost smile. 6 weeks after the wedding, a late summer storm rolled in from the mountains. Rain lashed the house while thunder boomed overhead, shaking the windows in their frames. Victoria was cleaning up after dinner when a particularly loud crack made her jump. Cain looked up from the ledger he was working on and saw her expression. "Just thunder," he said gently. "The house has weathered worse. I know, it is just so loud." He set aside his work and came over to where she stood by the sink. "When I was a boy, I was terrified of storms. My mother used to tell me the thunder was just the angels moving furniture in heaven." Despite her nervousness, Victoria smiled. Did that help? Not really, but it made her feel better to think she was helping. He hesitated, then added, "You can come sit by the fire if you want. The storm might last a while." They sat together on the long bench near the fireplace, listening to the rain hammer down. Cain had brought his ledger, but he did not open it, just sat with his shoulder almost touching hers. The proximity was comforting, his solid presence easing her jangled nerves. "Sarah hated storms too," he said quietly. "She would hide in the bedroom with the covers over her head until they passed." It was the first time he had mentioned his late wife without being prompted. Victoria did not know what to say, so she just waited, letting him work through whatever he needed to express. "I never knew how to comfort her," he continued. "She was so delicate, so easily frightened. I felt like everything I did was wrong. I was too rough, too quiet, too focused on the ranch. By the time she got pregnant, we barely spoke except about necessary things. That must have been difficult, it was, but I did not know how to fix it, and then she died and I never got the chance." He turned to look at Victoria directly. "With you, it is different. You are not fragile. I do not have to worry that my rough edges will break you. We all have fragile parts, Cain. Mine are just better hidden." He reached out and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. His palm was warm and rough against her own calloused skin. "Then maybe we can be fragile together sometimes, behind these walls where no one else can see." Victoria squeezed his hand. "I would like that." They sat there through the storm, hands linked, shoulders touching. It was intimate in a way that had nothing to do with physical passion. When the thunder finally rumbled away into the distance, and the rain softened to a gentle patter, neither of them moved. Eventually, Cain lifted their joined hands and kissed her knuckles, right over the worst of the scars from the mill. "Beautiful," he murmured again, and this time Victoria believed him. That night when he walked her to her bedroom door, she stood on her toes and kissed him. Not a chaste peck like at their wedding, but a real kiss, her lips moving against his with clear intent. He made a surprised sound, then his arms came around her, pulling her close. The kiss deepened, and Victoria felt heat flood through her body. His hands were careful on her back, holding her like something precious even as the kiss turned hungry. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cain rested his forehead against hers. "Victoria, I am ready," she said softly. "If you are." His hands trembled slightly as they cupped her face. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." He kissed her again, slower this time, then took her hand and led her to his bedroom. The room was plain like the rest of the house, dominated by a large bed covered with a simple quilt. He lit a lamp on the bedside table, keeping the light low, then turned to her with an expression that was equal parts desire and uncertainty. "I want this to be good for you," he said. "Tell me if I do something you do not like." Victoria stepped close and began unbuttoning his shirt with fingers that only shook a little. "I will. But Cain, I trust you. I am not afraid." They undressed each other slowly, learning the geography of bodies that had been shaped by hard work. His chest was broad and heavily muscled, marked with scars from various ranch accidents. Her frame was thinner than it should be, ribs too prominent but strong in its own way. When they were both bare, he drew her to the bed and took his time exploring her with hands that were gentle despite their roughness. Victoria had expected pain, awkwardness, the fumbling uncertainty of two people who did not know each other well. Instead, she found patience and care. Cain paid attention to her responses, learning what made her gasp and what made her arch into his touch. When he finally moved over her, his creek-water eyes searched her face for any sign of discomfort. "All right," he asked, voice rough with restraint. "Yes," she breathed, and drew him down into another kiss. There was some discomfort as her body adjusted to the intrusion, but it faded quickly into something else, something that built like a slow fire in her belly. Cain moved with measured control, his breathing harsh against her neck. When her nails dug into his shoulders, he groaned, and the sound of it sent a thrill through her. This was vulnerability made physical, barriers falling away, two scarred people finding comfort in each other. Afterward, they lay tangled together, sweat cooling on their skin. Cain's hand traced idle patterns on her shoulder while she rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. She had not expected tenderness from this stern rancher, but he was full of surprises. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair. She tilted her head to look at him. "For what?" "For being brave enough to come here, for giving this a chance, for being you." Victoria's throat tightened with emotion. "I am the one who should be grateful. You gave me a home when I had nothing." "We gave each other a home," he corrected and kissed her forehead. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and when Victoria woke in the morning with his arm heavy across her waist, she felt something she had not experienced in years: contentment. The seasons turned. Summer's heat gave way to autumn's cool mornings and brilliant foliage. Victoria learned more about the ranch with each passing day, becoming increasingly capable and confident. She could handle a horse competently now, ride out to check on distant water sources, even help with some of the cattle work when extra hands were needed. Jack and Tommy treated her as a full partner rather than just the boss's wife, which she appreciated more than they knew. The relationship between her and Cain deepened as the weeks passed. They were partners in every sense, working together during the day and finding comfort in each other's arms at night. The separate bedrooms were abandoned without discussion, both of them gravitating to the larger bed in what had become their shared room. They learned each other's rhythms and preferences, both in work and in intimacy. Cain's stern exterior hid a man capable of surprising gentleness, while Victoria discovered a capacity for passion she had not known she possessed. In late October, she realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be certain, then another, before finally saying something. They were working in the garden together, pulling up the last of the summer vegetables before the first hard freeze, when she finally gathered her courage. "Cain, I think I might be pregnant." His hands stilled in the dirt. He looked up at her slowly, his expression carefully neutral. "How certain are you?" "Fairly certain. I have missed 2 courses and I have been feeling sick in the mornings." He sat back on his heels, dirt falling from his fingers. "How do you feel about that?" She had expected him to ask that. After what happened with Sarah, of course he would be concerned about her feelings rather than assuming she would be happy. "I am scared," she admitted, "but I am also happy. I want a family with you, Cain. I want children, but I understand if you are worried." He stood abruptly and held out his hand to help her up. When she was on her feet, he pulled her into a tight embrace, his face buried in her hair. She could feel him trembling. "I am terrified," he said roughly. "After Sarah, after losing them both, I swore I would never go through that again. But with you, I want to try. I want everything with you. I just need you to promise me that if anything goes wrong, if you need help, you will tell me immediately. No being brave, no trying to handle it alone." Victoria pulled back enough to look at his face. "I promise. We will be careful. And Cain, I am strong. You know that. Strength does not always matter when it comes to childbirth. Sarah was young and healthy, and it still went wrong. Then we will make sure I am not alone when the time comes. We will bring the doctor out here before I am due. We will take every precaution. But I need you to believe that this can turn out well. I need you to have hope." He cupped her face in his dirty hands and kissed her with a mixture of desperation and tenderness. "I will try. For you, I will try." They rode into Snowflake the next day to see the doctor. He was a practical man in his 50s named Dr. Harrison, who had seen his share of difficult births. He examined Victoria thoroughly, asked detailed questions about her health and family history, and finally pronounced that she seemed healthy and strong. "The baby should come sometime in early June," he said, wiping his hands on a towel. "You are built well for childbearing, Mrs. Lockhart. Strong hips, good health despite your thinness. The morning sickness should pass in another month or so. Make sure you are eating enough, getting rest, and do not overwork yourself." Cain, who had been pacing the small examination room like a caged animal, finally spoke up. "What are the risks? What could go wrong?" Dr. Harrison gave him a sympathetic look. "Mr. Lockhart, I heard about your first wife. I am sorry for your loss, but every pregnancy is different, and Mrs. Lockhart here seems to be in much better condition. That said, there are always risks. Bleeding, infection, the baby being positioned wrong, the cord getting tangled. But most births go smoothly, especially for young, healthy women like your wife. I want you there when her time comes," Cain said firmly. "I will pay whatever it costs, but I want you at the ranch before she is due. That can be arranged. Send word a few weeks before the baby is expected, and I will come stay at your place until after the birth." They left the doctor's office with a mixture of relief and persistent worry. Cain was quiet on the ride home, his jaw tight with tension. Victoria let him work through his thoughts until they were almost back at the ranch, then reached over and placed her hand on his knee. "We are going to be all right," she said firmly. "All three of us." He covered her hand with his. "I am going to hold you to that." Winter came to the high country with a vengeance. Snow piled high around the ranch buildings, and the temperature dropped low enough to freeze water in the troughs overnight. The work became harder, requiring constant effort to keep the livestock fed and watered. Victoria's pregnancy progressed through it all, her belly growing round as the year turned over into 1883. The morning sickness passed as predicted, replaced by a ravenous appetite and boundless energy. Dr. Harrison had warned her to take it easy, but Victoria found it nearly impossible to sit idle while there was work to be done. She compromised by avoiding the heaviest tasks and letting Cain fuss over her more than she normally would have tolerated. He was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He worried when she walked on icy ground, fretted about her lifting anything heavier than a book, and checked on her constantly throughout the day. It would have been annoying if she had not understood the fear driving his behavior. So she let him worry, reassured him constantly, and tried to be patient with his anxiety. In February, a blizzard rolled in that lasted 3 days. They were snowed in completely, unable to even reach the barn without ropes strung between buildings to keep from getting lost in the whiteout conditions. Cain and the ranch hands worked around the clock to keep the animals alive, breaking ice, hauling feed, ensuring nothing froze to death. Victoria kept the house warm, cooked massive amounts of food to fuel their efforts, and tried not to worry too much. On the second night, Cain came in so cold he could barely speak. his hands and face red and raw despite his gloves and scarf. She sat him by the fire, brought him hot coffee, and rubbed feeling back into his frozen fingers. "The cattle?" she asked. "Most of them are all right. We lost 2 calves and 1 old cow. Could have been worse." His teeth chattered as he spoke. "How are you? Is the baby all right?" She guided his hand to her belly, where their child was moving actively. "Feel that? Active as always. We are fine, Cain. Stop worrying about us and focus on getting warm." He pressed his palm against her swollen stomach, his expression softening as he felt the baby kick. "That never stops being amazing. Here, drink your coffee before it gets cold." They sat together by the fire while the storm raged outside, his hand resting on her belly, feeling their child move. Despite the harsh weather and difficult conditions, Victoria felt a deep sense of peace. This was home. This man was her partner. Whatever challenges came, they would face them together. The blizzard finally broke on the 3rd day, leaving behind a landscape buried in white. The cleanup took weeks. They discovered they had lost more cattle than initially thought, frozen in distant corners of the property. It was a hard blow financially, but Cain took it with stoic acceptance. "This was ranch life," he explained. "Some years were good, others were hard. You took the losses and kept moving forward." As spring approached, Victoria's pregnancy became impossible to ignore. Her belly was huge, making even simple tasks challenging. She could no longer ride, could barely reach across the kitchen table, and spent half her time needing to relieve herself. But the baby was active and healthy, and Dr. Harrison's monthly examinations continued to be reassuring. In late May, as Victoria entered her final month, Dr. Harrison came to stay at the ranch as promised. He set up in the spare room and made himself useful, helping with chores and keeping Cain's anxiety from spiraling completely out of control. His presence was reassuring, a reminder that if anything went wrong, help was already there. The first pains came on a warm June morning while Victoria was feeding the chickens. She straightened up with a gasp, her hand going to her belly as the contraction tightened like a band around her middle. It passed after a moment, and she took a shaky breath. This was it. The baby was coming. She walked carefully back to the house, where Dr. Harrison took one look at her face and nodded. "All right, Mrs. Lockhart. Let us get you comfortable. Mr. Lockhart, you might want to fetch some water." Cain's face had gone pale. "Is she all right? Is something wrong?" "She is in labor, which is perfectly normal. Now, water, if you please." The next hours passed in a haze of pain and effort. Dr. Harrison coached her through the contractions, his calm presence helping her stay focused. Cain hovered nearby, looking like he might be sick at any moment. She would have found it funny if she was not in so much pain. "I can see the head," Dr. Harrison said after what felt like forever. "You are doing wonderfully, Mrs. Lockhart. Just a bit more. On the next contraction, push with everything you have." Victoria bore down with all her strength, the same determination that had gotten her through factory work and poverty and the long journey west. She felt something give, a rush of relief, and then the sound of a baby's cry filled the room. "It is a boy, Doctor," Harrison announced, holding up a red-faced, squalling infant. "A healthy boy with good lungs." Cain made a choked sound. Victoria looked over to see tears streaming down his face as he stared at the baby. "Doctor." Harrison quickly cleaned the infant and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in Victoria's arms. The baby was perfect. Tiny and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. He had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused eyes, his little mouth working. Victoria felt a surge of love so intense it took her breath away. "Come here," she said to Cain, who was still frozen by the door. "Come meet your son." He approached slowly, as if afraid he might shatter the moment. When he reached the bed, he sank to his knees beside it, his eyes fixed on the baby. "He is so small." "He is perfect," Victoria corrected. "Do you want to hold him?" Cain's hands shook as he took the baby, supporting the tiny head with exaggerated care. The baby made a small sound and Cain's face crumpled. "I have a son," he whispered. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Victoria asked, watching her husband cradle their child with such tenderness it made her heart ache. "I was thinking about my father. His name was Charles." "We could call the baby that if you like. Charles Lockhart, I like it. Charlie for short." Dr. Harrison finished his work and stepped back, a satisfied smile on his weathered face. "Everything looks good, Mrs. Lockhart. You did excellently. Rest now, both of you. I will check on you in a few hours." After the doctor left, Cain carefully placed Charlie back in Victoria's arms and climbed onto the bed beside them. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and together they looked down at their son. "You did it," Cain said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were so strong, Victoria, so brave." "We did it," she corrected. "All three of us." Little Charlie made a snuffling sound and his tiny hand emerged from the blanket, fingers spreading wide. Without thinking, Victoria offered her finger, and the baby's hand closed around it with surprising strength. His palm was impossibly small, the skin soft and perfect, unmarred by work or hardship. Cain reached out and touched Charlie's hand with one rough finger. "Someday his hands will be as rough as ours," he said softly. "From working this ranch, from building something worthwhile. But right now they are perfect." "They will always be perfect," Victoria said, "just like ours are. Because hands that work hard, that build and create and hold the people we love, those are the most beautiful hands in the world." Cain lifted her hand, the one not holding their baby, and kissed her palm just like he had done that evening on the porch months ago. "Beautiful," he agreed. "Everything about you is beautiful, Victoria Lockhart." She leaned into him, exhausted but happy beyond measure. Outside, the June sun climbed higher in the sky over the Arizona territory. Inside, a new family had been born, forged from necessity and built on understanding. It had not been an easy path, but the best things never were. The weeks after Charlie's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings. The baby had healthy lungs and used them frequently, especially between the hours of midnight and dawn. Victoria was exhausted, but Cain helped as much as he could, walking the floor with the baby when he was fussy, changing soiled cloths, and taking over the household chores that Victoria could not manage while caring for an infant. Dr. Harrison stayed for a week to ensure mother and baby were both healthy before returning to Snowflake. Before he left, he pulled Cain aside for a private conversation that Victoria watched through the window. She could see the tension in Cain's shoulders, the intensity of his focus as the doctor spoke. When they shook hands and Dr. Harrison departed, Cain stood for a long moment staring after the wagon before coming back inside. "What did he say?" Victoria asked from where she sat nursing Charlie. "He said you are one of the strongest women he has ever delivered a baby for. He said most women in your position, having worked as hard as you did, would have had complications. But you sailed through it." Cain's voice was full of wonder. "He also said we can have more children if we want. That your body handled it well and there is no reason to think future pregnancies would be any different. You want more children." He came and sat beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "I want whatever you want. If one is enough, then one is enough. If you want a houseful, then we will work toward that. Let us get through raising this one first," Victoria said with a tired laugh. "Then we can discuss having more." Summer passed into autumn, and Charlie grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby baby with Cain's creek water eyes and Victoria's dark hair. He was a happy child, quick to smile and laugh, and both parents were thoroughly besotted with him. Cain, who had been so stern and reserved when Victoria first met him, became a different person around his son. He would spend hours playing with the baby, making silly faces and singing off-key lullabies. Jack and Tommy were equally charmed. They took turns holding the baby during their lunch breaks, and Jack carved a set of wooden animals as toys. The ranch became a happier place, as if Charlie's presence had lifted some weight that had pressed down on all of them. In October, as Victoria was hanging laundry while Charlie napped in a basket at her feet, she saw a rider approaching fast. She recognized Jack's horse and felt a spike of concern. The ranch hand was supposed to be checking the north pasture, and his haste suggested trouble. He pulled up in a cloud of dust. "Mrs. Lockhart, we have got cattle missing, at least 20 head, maybe more, and there are tracks suggesting they did not wander off on their own. Rustlers, looks like it. I came to fetch the boss. Where is he?" "In the barn, repairing tack." Victoria scooped up the basket with Charlie. "Come on." They found Cain working on a saddle, his hands busy with leather and tools. He looked up at their approach and immediately read the situation from their expressions. "What is wrong?" Jack explained about the missing cattle. Cain's face hardened into the stern mask Victoria had not seen in months. He set aside his work and stood, already planning. "How fresh are the tracks?" "Less than a day old, I would say. They are headed west toward the territorial line. If they cross into New Mexico, we will have a hell of a time getting the cattle back." Cain turned to Victoria. "I need to go after them. With Tommy and Jack, we can probably catch up by tomorrow if we ride hard." Victoria's stomach clenched with fear, but she kept her voice steady. "How dangerous is this likely to be? Rustlers are not usually looking for a fight. They are thieves, not killers, but I will be armed and I will be careful." She wanted to beg him not to go, to let the cattle go, but she understood this was part of ranch life. Those cattle represented significant money, resources they needed to keep the ranch running. "Be safe. Come back to us." He pulled her close, careful of the baby between them, and kissed her hard. "I will. Take care of Charlie. If I am not back in 3 days, ride to town and get help." "I will." She watched him gather supplies, weapons, and extra ammunition. Jack rode off to fetch Tommy while Cain saddled his horse. Within 30 minutes of Jack's arrival, all 3 men were mounted and ready to ride out. Cain leaned down from his saddle for one more kiss. "I love you," he said. It was the first time he had said those specific words out loud, though his actions had been saying it for months. Victoria's throat tightened. "I love you too, so come back to me. Always." They rode off at a gallop, and Victoria stood holding Charlie, watching until they disappeared over the ridge. Then she went back into the house, locked all the doors and windows, and tried very hard not to imagine all the things that could go wrong. The first day was the hardest. She kept busy with chores and caring for Charlie, but her mind would not stop conjuring worst-case scenarios. Rustlers who turned violent, accidents on the trail, 100 different disasters. She barely slept that night, jumping at every sound. The second day was a little easier. She forced herself to focus on the work that needed doing. The animals still needed tending, and Charlie needed her to be calm and present. She cleaned the house thoroughly, prepared extra food in case Cain and the hands came back hungry, and tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. On the evening of the third day, she was starting to seriously worry. If they were not back soon, she would have to make good on her promise to ride to town for help. But traveling alone with a baby was dangerous, and she hated the thought of leaving the ranch unguarded. Just as the sun was setting, she heard horses. She grabbed the rifle Cain had taught her to use and went to the window, relief flooding through her when she recognized Cain's silhouette. She threw open the door and ran out to meet them. Cain dismounted stiffly, exhaustion written in every line of his body. But he was whole and unharmed, and that was all that mattered. Victoria threw herself into his arms, and he held her tight. "We got them," he said. "All 23 head, recovered and back in the north pasture." The rustlers ran when they saw we were armed and serious. No one was hurt. "Thank God," she breathed against his chest. "I was so worried. I know, I am sorry." He pulled back to look at her face. "Is Charlie all right?" "He is fine. Inside sleeping. Come on, all of you need food and rest." She fed them a hot meal while they told the story. The rustlers had been 3 men, young and stupid, thinking they could make easy money. When confronted by 3 armed ranchers who clearly knew what they were doing, they had abandoned the cattle and fled. Jack thought they were probably halfway to Mexico by now. After Jack and Tommy headed to town for their own rest, Victoria helped Cain out of his dirty clothes and into a hot bath she had prepared. She washed his back, working out the knots of tension in his shoulders. "I meant what I said," he told her quietly. "When I was leaving, I love you, Victoria, more than I knew it was possible to love someone. Out there chasing those cattle, all I could think about was getting back to you and Charlie. You two are everything to me." Victoria's hand stilled on his shoulders. "I love you too. I think I started loving you that night on the porch when you kissed my hands and called them beautiful. No one had ever seen me like that before. You made me feel valuable." He reached back and caught one of her hands, bringing it around to kiss the palm again. The gesture had become their private language, a way of saying things that did not fit into words. "You are valuable. You are everything." That night, after he had slept a few hours and woke to find Charlie needing a feeding, Cain took the baby from Victoria and walked the floor with him, singing a soft lullaby. Victoria watched from the bed, her heart full to bursting. This man, who had been so stern and closed off, had opened up into someone warm and loving. And she had changed too, finding strength she did not know she possessed, building a life that was hard but deeply meaningful. The years passed with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Charlie grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious little boy who followed his father everywhere. 2 years after Charlie's birth, Victoria delivered a daughter they named Alina after Cain's mother. She had his strong features and Victoria's dark eyes, and she proved to be as determined and fearless as both her parents. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Victoria proved to have a good head for business, keeping meticulous records and finding ways to stretch their resources further. Cain respected her input on decisions, and they became true partners in every aspect of running the property. Jack and Tommy remained with them, becoming family rather than just employees. When Charlie was 5 and Alina 3, Cain came to Victoria with a proposal. They were sitting on the porch after the children had been put to bed, watching the sun set in its familiar blaze of color. "I have been thinking," he said. "We have done well these past years, better than well, and I want to invest some of the profit in expanding, maybe buy the Henderson property that borders our north pasture. They are talking about selling and moving back east." Victoria considered it. "That would nearly double our land. Could we handle that much?" "With the right help, yes. We would need to hire another hand or two, but it would give us room to expand the herd, maybe try breeding horses more seriously. It is a risk, but I think it is a good one." "Then let us do it." "I trust your judgment, Cain, and mine. Together we can make it work." He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Together. That has always been the secret, has it not? We are stronger as a team than either of us could be alone." She leaned against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and stars began to emerge. This life was not easy, would never be easy, but it was theirs, built on understanding, respect, and a love that had grown from the rough soil of necessity into something beautiful and enduring. "Do you ever regret it?" Cain asked suddenly. "Coming out here, marrying a stranger, giving up whatever life you might have had in Boston?" Victoria thought about the cramped tenements, the grinding poverty, the mill with its locked doors and constant danger. She thought about the woman she had been when she stepped off that train, desperate and uncertain, with nothing but rough palms and fading hope. "Not for a single moment," she said. "You gave me a home, Cain, a real home, and I like to think I gave you one too." "You did," he said softly. "You gave me everything." They acquired the Henderson property that fall, and the expansion proved to be exactly the right move. The additional land allowed them to increase their herd significantly, and Cain's horse breeding operation became known throughout the territory for quality animals. They hired 2 more hands, both young men eager to learn the ranching trade, and the operation hummed with productive energy. Charlie proved to be a natural rancher, showing his father's patience with animals and his mother's quick mind for numbers. Eleanor was more interested in the horses, spending hours in the stable brushing them and talking to them in her serious little voice. Both children were healthy and happy, growing up with the kind of security and love neither parent had known in their own childhoods. In 1889, when Victoria was 30, she discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was no fear, just quiet joy. Dr. Harrison had long since retired, but his replacement, a younger man named Dr. Cole, was equally competent. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and in early spring of 1890, Victoria delivered twin boys they named James and Michael. The house became chaotic with 4 children, but it was a good chaos, full of laughter and noise and life. Cain built an addition onto the house to give everyone more space, and Victoria hired a young woman from town to help with the housework and childcare. Her name was Anna, and she was the daughter of the shopkeeper, eager for work that paid better than her father's store. Victoria found herself thinking often about the woman she had been when she first arrived in Arizona Territory. That frightened girl with rough palms and no prospects seemed like a different person entirely. She had become someone confident, capable, part of a community. The townspeople respected her, both for her business acumen and her willingness to help neighbors in need. She had delivered several babies when Dr. Cole could not arrive in time, drawn on her own experience to talk other women through difficult births. Her hands were still rough. If anything, they were more calloused now than they had been from the mill. But she no longer felt shame when she looked at them. They were her hands, marked by the work she did, the life she had built. They had held her babies, worked alongside her husband, created a home from nothing. On their 10th anniversary, Cain gave her a beautiful silver bracelet engraved with both their names. She gave him a new saddle she had saved up for, made by the best leather worker in the territory. They celebrated with a rare dinner in town, leaving the children with Anna for the evening. 10 years, Cain said, raising his glass. Sometimes it feels like you just stepped off that train yesterday. Other times it feels like you have always been here. I have always been here, Victoria said, or at least the part of me that matters has been. Everything before you, before this life, that was just preparation. This is where I was meant to be. They touched glasses, and in his creek water eyes she saw everything. Love, gratitude, partnership, passion. They had built something rare and precious, a marriage that was not just romantic love but genuine friendship and respect. They had weathered hardships together, celebrated triumphs, raised children, and made a life. When they returned home that night, the house was dark and quiet, the children asleep. Cain pulled Victoria close in their bedroom, his work-roughened hands gentle on her face. He kissed her slowly, thoroughly, with the confidence of a man who knew exactly how to please his wife after 10 years of practice. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "Every day, I love you more. I did not think that was possible, but you keep proving me wrong." "I love you too," she said, her own rough palms cupping his face. "Thank you for seeing beauty in my scars." "Always," he promised and kissed each of her palms in turn. "Always beautiful, always mine." They made love with the unhurried passion of people who knew they had all the time in the world. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Victoria felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. This was happiness. Not the fairy tale version from books, but something better because it was real. Built on hard work and honest communication, weathered by challenges, strengthened by time, the children grew. Charlie turned into a teenager who was already taller than his father and showing signs of being an even better rancher. Eleanor developed a gift for training horses that drew buyers from across the territory. James and Michael were inseparable, getting into the kind of mischief that made Victoria laugh even as she scolded them. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in northern Arizona. In 1895, when Victoria was 36 and Cain was 44, they received news that Arizona was likely to become a state within the next decade. The territory was growing, towns were expanding, and the wild lawlessness of the early days was giving way to more established civilization. Change was coming, but Victoria and Cain faced it together, as they had faced everything. One evening, with all the children in bed and the house finally quiet, they sat on their porch watching the stars. Cain's arm was around Victoria's shoulders, her head resting against him. This had become their ritual over the years, this quiet time together after the chaos of the day had settled. "You remember the first time we sat here like this?" Cain asked. "During that summer storm right after you arrived. I remember. I was so nervous. I barely knew you, and I was terrified you would decide I was not good enough for this life." "I was terrified too," he admitted. "Terrified I would fail you like I felt I had failed Sarah. Terrified of caring about someone again and losing them. But you were so strong, Victoria. From that first day, you showed me that you were different, that we could be different together. We made a good team, the best team." He kissed the top of her head. "I was thinking today about that advertisement I placed. About how desperate I was for help, how I had convinced myself I just needed a housekeeper who would not complain about the isolation. I never imagined I would find you. Someone who would become my partner, my best friend, the love of my life." Victoria tilted her head back to look at him. Even after all these years, the sight of him still made her heart skip. The silver in his hair, the weathered lines on his face, the creek water eyes that looked at her with such devotion. "I never imagined any of this," she said. "When I stepped off that train with my rough hands and my desperate hope, I was just trying to survive. I never thought I would find a home, a family, a love like ours." "Your hands," he said, taking one of them in his. He examined it in the dim light from the windows, tracing the calluses, the scars, the rough skin that told stories of hard work and harder survival. "I meant what I said that first time. They are beautiful. Everything about you is beautiful." Tears pricked Victoria's eyes. "You saved me, Cain. In every way a person can be saved. You gave me hope when I had none, a home when I had nowhere to go, and love when I thought I was unworthy of it. You saved me too," he said roughly. "I was dying inside after Sarah, just going through the motions of living. You brought me back to life. You showed me that grief does not have to be the end of the story, that it is possible to love again, to build again, to hope again." They kissed there on the porch, surrounded by the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. It was not their first kiss, not even close, but it held the weight of 13 years of marriage, of 4 children, of a life built together from nothing but determination and faith in each other. Inside the house, their children slept safely. Beyond the porch, their land stretched out under the stars, acres and acres of hard-won territory. And here, in this moment, Victoria Lockhart felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. The story could have ended there, with that perfect moment on the porch. But life did not stop for perfect moments. It kept moving forward, bringing new challenges and joys. And Victoria and Cain faced them all together, year after year, decade after decade. Charlie married at 23, bringing home a sweet-natured young woman named Sarah from one of the neighboring ranches. Eleanor married 2 years later to a horse trader from Colorado who appreciated her gift with animals. The twins eventually went their separate ways, James becoming a lawyer in Phoenix, while Michael stayed on the ranch to help his aging father. Victoria and Cain aged together gracefully. Her hair turned silver, his face became even more weathered by time and sun. Their hands, both of them, grew more gnarled and scarred with each passing year. But they never stopped working, never stopped building, never stopped loving each other with the fierce devotion that had sustained them through everything. In 1912, Arizona finally achieved statehood. Cain was 61, Victoria 53. They celebrated at a big party in Snowflake, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Charlie had given them 3 grandchildren, Eleanor 2. More were on the way. The legacy they had built together was spreading, taking root, growing into something neither of them could have imagined that hot summer day in 1882, when a desperate woman stepped off a train with nothing but rough palms and fading hope. As the party wound down and they prepared to head back to the ranch, Cain pulled Victoria aside. They stood under the stars, just like they had 1,000 times before on their porch. 30 years, he said wonderingly. 30 years since you came here. 30 years of the best life I could have asked for. Victoria took his hand, lacing their fingers together. Both their hands were rough now, equally marked by decades of hard work. 30 years, she agreed, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts. They made the good parts matter more. She squeezed his hand. I love you, Cain Lockhart. I have loved you for 30 years, and I will love you for however many more we have. He pulled her close, and they swayed together in an impromptu dance under the Arizona stars. Around them, their family laughed and talked and celebrated, but Victoria and Cain existed in their own bubble. 2 people who had found each other across impossible circumstances, who had built a life and a love that had endured. Beautiful, Cain murmured, lifting her hand to kiss her palm one more time. Still beautiful, always beautiful. And Victoria, who had once thought her rough hands were something to be ashamed of, smiled. Because she finally understood what he had known all along. Beauty was not about softness or perfection. It was about strength, survival, and the courage to keep building even when everything seemed impossible. Her hands were beautiful because they had worked and bled and created. They had held her babies, partnered with her husband, built a legacy. They told the story of a woman who had refused to give up, who had traveled across a continent on nothing but desperate hope, and had found everything she never knew she needed. The years continued to unfold, bringing the inevitable challenges of aging. Cain's joints grew stiff, making the ranch work harder. Victoria's eyesight began to fail, requiring her to hold books closer to read. But they adapted, as they had always adapted, leaning on each other and on their children when necessary. Michael took over more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, proving to have inherited his father's steadiness and his mother's business sense. He married a woman named Helen, and they gave Cain and Victoria 3 more grandchildren to spoil. The house that had once seemed too quiet now regularly overflowed with family, especially during holidays. In 1920, when Victoria was 61 and Cain was 70, they decided to officially retire. Michael and Helen would take over the ranch completely, while Cain and Victoria moved into a smaller house that Michael built for them on the property. It was bittersweet, letting go of the direct management of the ranch they had built together, but it also felt right. They had earned their rest. The small house had a large porch that faced west, perfect for watching sunsets. They spent countless evenings there, rocking in chairs Michael had crafted for them, watching their family work the land. Sometimes children or grandchildren would join them, asking for stories about the old days. Victoria would tell them about Boston, about the mill, about stepping off the train into an uncertain future. Cain would talk about building the ranch, about the hard winters and good summers, about the challenges they had overcome together. But their favorite stories were about each other. About the day they met, about how Cain had kissed Victoria's rough palms and called them beautiful, about how they had fallen in love slowly but completely. The grandchildren loved these stories, asking for them again and again, and Victoria never tired of telling them. "I want a love like yours," their oldest granddaughter once said wistfully. She was 16, at that age where romance seemed like the most important thing in the world. Victoria smiled and took the girl's smooth, young hands in her own gnarled ones. "Then look for someone who sees your strength as beauty, who values your work as much as your appearance, who wants to build something with you, not just for you. That is the secret to a love that lasts." Cain, listening from his chair, reached over and took Victoria's hand. Even after nearly 40 years of marriage, the gesture still made her heart warm. He lifted her hand and kissed her palm, right over the calluses that had never faded. "Beautiful," he said, like he had said 1,000 times before. "Still the most beautiful hands I have ever seen." Their granddaughter smiled, beginning to understand that beauty meant something different to her grandparents than what the world usually claimed. It was a lesson Victoria hoped the girl would carry with her. In 1925, Cain fell ill with pneumonia. He was 74, and his body was simply worn out from years of hard living. Dr. Cole's successor, a young physician named Dr. Martinez, did everything he could, but Cain grew weaker despite the treatment. Victoria barely left his side, sleeping in a chair next to their bed, holding his hand through the long nights. "I am not ready," she told him one evening when they were alone. Tears streamed down her face, the first time she had let herself cry. "I am not ready to lose you." Cain's hand tightened weakly on hers. His breathing was labored, but his eyes were clear. "Victoria, you are the strongest person I have ever known. You will be all right. But I do not want to be all right without you. You will not be without me. I will always be with you." He struggled to lift her hand to his lips and kissed it one last time. "Beautiful," he whispered. "My beautiful, strong wife, what a life we have had." "The best life," she agreed through her tears. "The very best." Cain Lockhart died peacefully 2 days later, surrounded by his wife and children. Victoria held his hand until the very end, and even then, she did not want to let go. Finally, Michael gently pried her fingers away and led her from the room. The funeral was enormous. It seemed like everyone in Snowflake and the surrounding ranches came to pay their respects. Cain had been a pillar of the community, respected and admired. But no one mourned him like Victoria, who felt like half of herself had been torn away. The months after his death were the hardest of her life, worse even than her years in the mill. At least then she had been fighting for survival, had purpose and forward momentum. Now she was adrift, trying to figure out who she was without the partner who had defined so much of her adult life. Her children worried about her. They took turns staying with her, trying to coax her to eat, to get out of the house, to engage with life again. Victoria appreciated their concern but felt disconnected from everything. She went through the motions of living without really being present. 3 months after Cain's death, Victoria sat on the porch of the small house, looking out over the ranch. Her hands rested in her lap and she found herself examining them. They were old woman's hands now, spotted and wrinkled, the knuckles swollen with arthritis. But the calluses were still there, as permanent as scars. Evidence of a lifetime of work. She remembered that first day, standing on this land with Cain, how nervous she had been. How he had taken her hand and told her that hard work was more valuable than soft skin. How he had built her up rather than tearing her down, had seen her strength when others only saw her flaws. Tears came then, but they were different from the grief that had consumed her. These were tears of gratitude. For 43 years, she had shared her life with a man who loved her completely, who valued her for exactly who she was. Not everyone got that. Not everyone found the kind of partnership they had built together. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind, hoping somehow Cain could hear her. "Thank you for seeing me, for loving me, for giving me the best life I could have imagined." The grief did not disappear after that moment, but it became bearable. Victoria began to engage with life again, finding purpose in her family and in the legacy she and Cain had built. She helped with the grandchildren, taught the granddaughters to cook, and so told stories about the old days. She remained active in the community, using her business knowledge to help other ranchers, particularly the wives who often did not have a voice in decisions. She lived for another 15 years, seeing Arizona continue to grow and change. She saw the ranch continue to prosper under Michael's management, saw more grandchildren and then great-grandchildren born. She held each new baby and told them about their grandfather, about his strength and kindness, about the love he had shown her. In the spring of 1940, at the age of 81, Victoria Lockhart died peacefully in her sleep. She was buried next to Cain in the cemetery outside Snowflake, under a headstone that read, "Victoria Dawson Lockhart, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she built a life with beautiful hands." At her funeral, her great-granddaughter, a girl of 17 named Victoria in her honor, asked her father about that phrase. "Why does it say beautiful hands? What does that mean?" Her father, Charlie's son, smiled. "It is a long story. Come on, let me tell you about your great-grandmother." And so the story was passed down, generation to generation. The story of a mail-order bride with rough palms who traveled across a continent on desperate hope. The story of a stern cowboy who saw beauty in calloused hands and built a love that lasted a lifetime. The story of two people who found each other against all odds and created something that endured long after they were gone. Years later, decades later, when that great-granddaughter had children of her own, she would tell them the same story. And she would take their soft, young hands in her own work roughened ones and say what Victoria had once said to her grandmother. "Look for someone who sees your strength as beauty, who values your work as much as your appearance, who wants to build something with you, not just for you." That is the secret to a love that lasts. And somewhere, in whatever existed beyond this life, Victoria and Cain Lockhart held hands and smiled. Their story had become more than just their own. It had become a legacy, a lesson, a reminder that real love was built on seeing each other truly, valuing each other completely, and working together through whatever life brought. Beautiful hands, beautiful hearts. A beautiful life, built from nothing but determination and the courage to hope when hope seemed foolish. That was their story. That was their gift to all who came after. The ranch still stood, generations later, still in the family, still productive. The original house had been renovated and expanded, but the bones of what Cain built remained. New generations walked the land, tended the cattle, raised their families. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the sun was setting, they would sometimes sit on the porch and think about the two people who started it all. A desperate woman with rough palms, a stern cowboy who called them beautiful, and a love that proved that the best foundations are built not on perfection, but on acceptance, partnership, and the courage to see beauty in unexpected places. That was the legacy of Victoria and Cain Lockhart. Not just a successful ranch, not just a large family, but a lesson about what really matters. About seeing strength in scars, beauty in roughness, and value in hard work. About building something that lasts not because it was easy, but because it was real. And that lesson, passed down through generations, remained as enduring as the land itself. A reminder that true love does not require perfection. It requires only honesty, respect, and the willingness to work side by side through whatever comes. The rest, as Victoria and Cain proved, takes care of itself.